Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you all a pleasant listening experience. Today, I'm introducing a book by the American political scientist Francis Fukuyama titled, Trust, the Social Virtues and the Creation of Prosperity. When we talk about Fukuyama, some of our viewers might have heard of him. He's a leading expert in American political institutions and international politics. His works share a common ambitious trait, offering broad perspectives aiming to analyze and interpret the fundamental principles governing human society. Fukuyama's Trust is another monumental work, exceeding 600 pages and over 300,000 words. His intent in writing this book was to explore, across various human behavioral patterns throughout history, a foundational driving force that supports economic development, social stability, and civilizational progress. What might this driving force be? After much exploration, Fukuyama believes it resides in the very nature of human social organization. According to him, while most political issues today revolve around economic matters, economics is just one integral component of human societal life. Therefore, comprehending the economy necessitates understanding how modern society self-organizes, a broader, more macroscopic issue. Ultimately, Fukuyama concludes that if one were to liken human society to a skyscraper, each member would be a brick, and trust among individuals would serve as the mortar. The strength of this mortar determines the solidity and resilience of civilization and society itself against risks. It's based on trust, especially trust among strangers, that humanity can transcend its narrow social networks, form larger organizational communities, and smoothly engage in fundamental activities like systematic production, information exchange, investment, and scientific research, crucial for building modern society. Throughout human history and across the world, civilizations that sustain economic growth and maintain social stability in harmony usually possess a strong tradition of internal mutual trust, with various explicit and implicit rules encouraging cooperation and punishing betrayal and deceit. To quantitatively analyze social trust levels and their correlation with societal and economic development, Fukuyama introduces the term social capital. It refers to a society or culture where members can form spontaneous groups beyond kinship relations. Countries rich in social capital tend to foster easier mutual trust among members, giving rise to larger, more innovative, and cost-effective social organizations, thereby ensuring social stability in sustained economic growth. Conversely, a decrease in trust among society's members not only affects stability, causing economic stagnation, but also leads to the degradation of the entire social ecosystem. In a simple summary of Fukuyama's book, it can be seen as a clear-cut dichotomy. In highly developed modern nations, societal organization thrives on mutual trust among strangers, termed systemic trust. In contrast, underdeveloped nations primarily rely on trust and cooperation within familial and residential social spaces, termed traditional trust. Comparing the two, the former has a significantly higher ceiling for development. Next, I'll break down the main content of this book into three parts. In the first part, we'll delve into how, in Fukuyama's view, the trust relationship between individuals affects socio-economic activities in society. In the second and third parts, we'll examine two contrasting examples, one side featuring Germany, where social trust levels are high, and the other side focusing on the relatively lower social trust and organizational levels in southern Italy. When it comes to the impact of mutual trust among individuals on socioeconomics, we can examine it from two perspectives, transactions and production. Let's first consider transactions. Those familiar with economics might know the concept of transaction costs, as described by the renowned economist Coase. These costs encompass the total time and monetary expenses required to facilitate a transaction. How does the level of trust among society's members affect transaction costs? For instance, why do some companies go to great lengths to establish a comprehensive in-house production chain, despite the common belief that outsourcing upstream and downstream production processes is the most economical solution? The reason behind this decision often lies in a lack of trust among certain enterprises toward external suppliers. Consequently, from the viewpoint of overall societal efficiency and resource allocation, such behavior, driven by a desire for self-security, leads to transaction costs significantly higher than reasonable levels, resulting in resource wastage. Similarly, as individual consumers, we may often encounter similar issues. For instance, certain e-commerce and food delivery platforms impose stringent rules and complex procedures for product returns and exchanges. Why does this situation arise? Essentially, it's due to a substantial number of users attempting to exploit return policies for personal gain. Consequently, to mitigate losses and control costs, platforms must elevate the threshold for returns, rigorously scrutinizing each request. However, this adversely affects consumers with genuine reasons for returns, causing harm to their interests. Moreover, the overall transaction costs for all consumers rise significantly due to the unethical actions of a small subset. According to Fukuyama, if mutual distrust prevails among a society's members, it's akin to imposing an additional, not insubstantial tax on various economic activities, whereas highly trusting societies don't have to bear this tax burden. Moving on from transactions, let's consider production. There's a real story about a U.S. steel company called Nucor that transformed from near bankruptcy to becoming a leading force in the American steel industry. One of the significant reasons behind this miracle was its employee community, a flat organizational structure built on high mutual trust. Frontline workers could propose optimization ideas for production processes and technologies based on their experiences. Upon acceptance, they received generous bonuses and promotion opportunities. Additionally, during the early 1980s when Nucor faced economic downturns and insufficient work, rather than resorting to massive layoffs, they reduced working hours across the board. Employees were paid based on hours worked, successfully navigating through this low period. Based on this, Fukuyama poses a question in his book. He believes there's a global tendency to explain all human activities, including economics, through economic theories, especially neoclassical economic theory, whose core tenet is that individuals pursue the maximization of their interests. However, this theory struggles to explain the success of companies like Nucor and fails to account for the prevailing norms in our current economic operations. According to classical economic theory and the typical practices of many struggling companies facing crises, executives at Nucor Steel should have resorted to swift layoffs and extensive cost-cutting measures to safeguard their high salaries and reduce the company's bankruptcy risk. Simultaneously, ordinary workers should have promptly sought opportunities elsewhere from what seemed like a declining company, aiming to secure compensation. However, the reason this typical scenario didn't occur was that every individual in this company made choices based on their attributes as members of a community rather than solely as employers or employees. As a highly trusting community with shared visions and goals, each member was willing to sacrifice some short-term personal gains for a longer-term collective goal. Eventually, after the economic recovery, the sacrifices made by Nucor Steel in solidarity and adversity led to substantial rewards. Hence, many scholars gradually realized that for market order to function well and for a society's economic total to continually expand, there needs to be some form of moral underpinning. Moreover, with the progress of human society, the specialization of labor, and the widespread use of mechanized manufacturing, the individual impact diminishes while group cooperation becomes mainstream. The ability of humans to engage in activities through collective cooperation stems from a shared moral consensus, a pursuit of common spiritual objectives and mutual trust. Traditionally, there's a notion that highly developed European countries, especially the UK and the US, prioritize individualism, encouraging the maximization of personal values. Yet, when measured in terms of social capital, a different conclusion emerges. For instance, developed countries like the UK, US, Germany, and France boast numerous large multinational corporations, indicating their citizens possess a strong capacity for constructing large-scale communities and engaging in cooperative efforts. Some might argue this stems from these countries' sheer size, enabling the creation of such colossal enterprises. However, often, the size of a company itself doesn't strongly correlate with the economic scale of its host country. Fukuyama illustrates this with examples like the Netherlands and Sweden, smaller developed nations that birthed multinational giants like Philips and IKEA. Therefore, we can conclude that apart from various economic, technological, and per capita income-related metrics, there exists a soft metric defining modernization or development in countries, a country or society's possession of social capital. The robustness of social capital within a country or society, the level of trust among individuals, and the willingness of society's members to organize into a community with strangers for common goals have less to do with the size of the nation or its population. Just now, following Fukuyama's research and narrative, we briefly understood the impact of trust among individuals on socio-economic activities. Surely, there are questions about why some societies or countries exhibit higher levels of trust among members, effectively driving economic development and social stability. What internal forces lead to their comparative advantages, and what specific factors influence them? Next, let's take Germany, a developed country renowned for its manufacturing and advanced technology, as a case study. Firstly, for a society to cultivate a high level of social trust, the growth of cities and commerce, these two crucial elements, is indispensable. When we previously explored the wealth of cities, we mentioned how the nascent form of modern capitalist commerce first emerged in a few developed Italian city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Florence in the early Middle Ages. This was because these cities, with their extensive areas and high population mobility, inherently possessed attributes conducive to breaking rural and kinship relations, fostering cooperation and trust among strangers. Similarly, modern capitalist commerce, especially long-distance maritime trade, provided the necessary soil and institutional protection for trust and cooperation among strangers, including credit systems, stockholding, insurance, and bills of exchange. However, these institutions cannot be implemented without basic social integrity. According to Fukuyama's research, social trust or the accumulation of social capital and the spontaneous formation of communities among individuals mutually reinforce and promote each other in a cyclical process. Of course, initially, primitive communities were also based on family kinship relations and local environments. For instance, in traditional Chinese society, the widespread local associations were built on regional affiliations. People from the same province working together away from home naturally trusted and supported each other. If someone deceived or harmed their fellow province members, there was a high probability of being ostracized by the community when returning home, a form of social death. In cities, solely relying on relatives and fellow provincials often wasn't enough to sustain livelihoods. Thus, communities based on cooperation among strangers emerged as commerce and craftsmanship developed and specialization intensified. Guilds, such as those of cobblers, butchers, bakers, and more, were formed. These guilds aimed to establish product quality standards, improve craftsmanship, regulate production to ensure the guild's profitability, and restrict the number of practitioners to prevent cutthroat competition. According to Fukuyama, during medieval Europe, the regions with the strongest guild influence and the most diverse types of guilds were in Germany. This was because until the mid-19th century, Germany lacked a strong central government, and being a Central European hub facilitated trade and craftsmanship. Consequently, in the sprawling German cities, guilds wielded economic influence and were major players in managing public affairs. In rural Germany, much like guilds in cities, there existed farming cooperatives based on family units that offered mutual support. After the unification of Germany, with the widespread adoption of large-scale industrial mechanized production, the communal and guild structures, remnants of the medieval feudal era, gradually disintegrated. Yet, many customs and practices from the communal and guild eras persisted. Interestingly, Germany's economic and industrial boom, including the renowned German engineering, is deeply intertwined with these customs and practices from the communal and guild eras. For instance, in the era of large-scale industry, factories in industrial powerhouses like the US and the UK implemented the Taylorist system, breaking down the production of complex products into numerous fixed processes carried out by different workers on an assembly line. Each worker specialized in a specific task, leading to a clear division between management and ordinary workers, with significant differences in status and remuneration. Conversely, in German factories, the situation was entirely different. Workers, akin to apprentices from the guild era, received training in multiple trades, moving between various production stations to familiarize themselves with the entire production process. A worker failing to meet the craft standards couldn't graduate or obtain a professional skills certificate. Moreover, the wage gap between frontline technical workers and management wasn't as significant as in Taylorist factories. Frontline workers could suggest optimizations and technological improvements at any time. In German factories, the direct supervisors of frontline workers were foremen, often promoted from the ranks of ordinary workers. They cooperated extensively over the years, fostering a closer-knit community with higher levels of trust. This trust-based interpersonal relationship, a relatively flat and flexible organizational structure, often resulted in higher work efficiency and innovation compared to factories employing the Taylorist system. Therefore, unlike in other European countries, being a blue-collar worker in Germany doesn't imply lower status or meager income. Continuous technical training and acquiring various professional certificates enable workers to enhance their remuneration and eventually advance to become engineers or enter managerial positions. Fukuyama's statistics in the book suggest that only about 10% of German industrial workers lack any professional skills certificates, whereas in France, this figure is over half. Additionally, German enterprises form closely knit communities of shared interests, balancing competition with mutual assistance. For instance, financial institutions offer long-term loans to manufacturing firms, and different companies within an industrial conglomerate can share research and development costs or jointly participate in industry-wide restructuring plans and even share market shares. Ultimately, Germany's prosperity is fundamentally rooted in the establishment of diverse, internally connected social communities. The driving force behind the craftsman spirit and German engineering lies in the profound identification and trust regular society members have in their professions, companies, and society as a whole. This invisible and intangible capital significantly enhances the frequency of innovative activities and information flow while reducing transaction costs. Conversely, when in a country or society, social members are unwilling to trust strangers, and trust is limited to kinship relations or local environments, it invariably impedes economic development. If an area, or even an entire country, falls into a state of insufficient social capital, lacking a sense of community, it becomes quite problematic. In his book, Fukuyama extensively analyzes the southern part of Italy as a negative case to illustrate this point. Italy is intriguing in the sense that the north, central, and southern regions starkly differ in economic development and cultural customs. Advanced industries, high-tech enterprises, and even the fashion and creative industry are concentrated in the north and central regions, while the south consistently lags economically, facing social chaos. What's the story behind this? In the 1950s, a renowned political scientist from Harvard University, Banfield, conducted field research in southern Italy. Banfield selected a dilapidated town in southern Italy called Montegrano and resided there for an extended period. To his surprise, apart from basic family ties, the residents lacked any social organization that transcended kinship. People generally distrusted those unrelated by blood and the government, displaying indifference and hostility towards non-relatives. Simultaneously, the town's economy was highly uniform, primarily based on agricultural production. Most residents struggled as subsistence farmers, while a few affluent landlords were disinclined to invest in riskier advanced industries or contribute to education or healthcare, believing it was the government's responsibility. What's worse, the lack of social trust meant there was no communal structure between the government and families to provide residents with basic services like social security, community services, information exchange, and economic cooperation. Ordinary people harbored suspicions about the government and even influential figures willing to undertake such initiatives, presuming they must be benefiting from this in some way. Fukuyama observed that apart from families, the only organization providing a bit of communal function in southern Italy was the Catholic Church. However, social studies indicated that in Italy, areas where the Catholic Church held more influence tended to have lower education levels and conservative thinking, attributes distinctly unfavorable for economic development, particularly in high-tech industries or large-scale manufacturing. Certainly, the vacuum in social relations inevitably prompts the emergence of some functionally similar organizations. Hence, in southern Italy, criminal organizations like the Mafia thrived. Fukuyama's analysis suggests that despite the Mafia's notorious activities, internally, it emphasizes a family-like atmosphere. This is because Italians, who trust only blood relations and lack trust in strangers, seek protection and help from the wider society beyond their families, instinctively constructing a community based on familiar, trusted family relationships. So you see, the Mafia, as a criminal organization, embodies two distinctive features: devoutness towards religion and imitation of family relations. This is vividly portrayed in the famous Hollywood mafia-themed film series, The Godfather. The character Don Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando, is revered as the Godfather. He acts not only as a godfather in the Catholic sense but also as the supreme patriarch of a large family. Apart from overseeing criminal activities, he tends to the daily lives, marriages, and funerals of distant and nearby relatives alike. Corleone's mafia organization is referred to as the Corleone family, comprising primarily of sons who share blood ties, childhood companions who've struggled together, and adopted sons treated as their own. Now, how does a society with low trust levels structurally impact economic development? The citrus industry in southern Italy provides a compelling example. British writer Helena Attlee, in her book, The Land Where Lemons Grow, narrated her on-site investigations into the citrus industry in Italy. She noted that post-World War II, numerous citrus plantations came under mafia control. During her visits, Attlee encountered a seemingly amiable old farmer who owned a citrus plantation. However, he was an infamous mafia leader, known as the Pope. These landowners with mafia backgrounds hired impoverished local farmers as laborers, paying extremely low wages. Sometimes, a day's wage was less than the retail price of 1 kilogram of top-quality citrus. Despite this, the farmers were unwilling to leave their familiar homeland to seek livelihoods elsewhere. Doing so meant disconnecting from their familiar social networks, losing their sense of belonging and security. Furthermore, the mafia, by controlling transportation related to citrus cultivation, irrigation, and wholesale agricultural products, reaped substantial profits. Additionally, the expansive citrus plantations served as underground factories for drug refinement by the mafia. Over time, the disproportionately high presence of citrus cultivation in the local economy stunted the growth of other industries. So why is the economy relatively prosperous in central and northern Italy? Fukuyama delves into a historical macro perspective. Cities like Venice, Genoa, and Florence in central and northern Italy were the cradle of capitalist commerce and trade in medieval Europe. The control the Catholic Church exerted on people's spirits waned gradually, and the famous Renaissance began to sprout here. Citizens engaged early in political decision-making, investment, and various guilds. There was significant population mobility, fostering diverse spontaneous social organizations and communities, thus establishing an unbroken tradition of society. In contrast, southern Italy, since the Middle Ages, was under the feudal rule of the Norman kingdom, lagging in commerce for an extended period. Cities were smaller, and farmers were tied to estates as laborers, unable to form strong communities independently. So, just as Banfield concluded from his observations in Montegrano, the lack of associations beyond the family is a limiting factor for economic development. Unless people can establish and maintain corporate organizations, modern economies won't emerge. Ultimately, this book argues that the fertile ground for the development of large industrial enterprises or high-tech industries lies in the high trust between society members, enabling the spontaneous formation of organizations and division of labor. Such large-scale social organizations inevitably possess characteristics like openness, high fluidity, transparency in information, and decision-making, qualities that are lacking in the closed, relatively kinship or territorially tied primitive communities. This also explains why the Sicilian mafia is limited to citrus cultivation or olive oil production, and Mexican cartels to avocado farming, unable to venture into industries like large-scale machinery manufacturing or computer chip development, as the underlying logic and social organization required for the latter are incompatible with impoverished social capital and low trust in human communities. Alright, that's the main gist of Fukuyama's Trust I've just introduced to you. In this book, Fukuyama expounds on his viewpoint. The primary driving force behind human economic and socio-cultural activities lies in the ability of individuals to form organizations and the level of trust among them. Despite the diversity of civilizations and social systems in human history, societies that achieve stability and sustained economic growth inevitably possess rich social capital, high levels of trust among members, and multi-layered spontaneous community organizations. To substantiate his conclusion, Fukuyama analyzes the social structures, moral consensus, and economic conditions of developed nations like England, the USA, France, Germany, Japan, and developing countries like China and South Korea. His conclusion is that the accumulation of social capital in a country is a complex result of its traditions, historical development paths, and socio-geographic environment. Some seemingly backward institutional and cultural factors at the time, such as feudal guild systems, in a broad time frame, actually safeguarded the richness and growth of societal communities, providing valuable support for future modern economic development and social construction. In the book's conclusion, following convention, Fukuyama looks toward the future, deliberating on how, in the highly technologically advanced and globally integrated 21st century, to enhance and enrich the overall trust of the entire human society, advancing overall prosperity and stability. Fukuyama states that all contemporary economic activities are accomplished by highly socially cooperative organizations rather than individuals. Hence, in this sense, the developmental paths of various countries and societies might converge significantly. Those nations or societies with low accumulation of social capital and trust can either enhance their internal community richness and overall trust through vertical, i.e., top-down intervention, or horizontal means, such as strengthening cooperation and exchanging experiences with advanced countries. Eventually, fostering an entirely new culture of cooperation and trust from the advanced sectors of individual socio-economies to permeate the entire society, thereby achieving societal stability and economic growth. At the micro level, Fukuyama also envisions that with technological advancements, a few small-scale enterprises and organizations empowered by technology can accomplish tasks that many large companies cannot through agile and rapid R&D or production. Therefore, he speculates that the optimal model for organizations in the future will not be small or large companies but a network structure that combines the strengths of both. The market itself is a school for nurturing societal behavior, providing opportunities and incentives for people to collaborate and seek prosperity together. That's the essence of this book. Congratulations on finishing another book. Thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice, achieve our financial goals, and create a better future together. Thank you all. Goodbye.